today's guest is the co-author of this amazing book I found, the Sustainable Business Book. And it was actually LID that reached out to me and said, "Oh, do you want to talk with Kevin?" Actually, we started on a totally different subject, but we'll cover that later. But then in our conversation, we ended on this. And actually, one of the reason why I thought we should be talking about sustainability, and people said, "Oh, well, there's a lot about that." It's actually, I've read most of the things Kevin have put together in this book before, but I've never seen it put together in this way. And I think that can become truly powerful for leaders if they can get a simple framework to take action from. So that's why we're together here today, Kevin. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome. Good to be here.
So Kevin, you have, so when you start digging in, I said that before we went live, when you start digging into your background and the amount of books you've been writing and the work you've done besides the book, the research, you also been reading a lot of books yourself. I have a long way to go, I could see on that list. Can you talk a bit about like your journey to get to here, become an author, not just of one book, multiple books, and also what led you to here?
Sure. Well, actually, the journey begins, not surprisingly, when I was born. But I wasn't born in a conventional place, really, because I was the son of RAF parents. So I was born in Gibraltar, and then I was brought up in Norway, in Oslo, and Naples in Italy.
Yeah.
And between that, I was either moving from one to the other or trying things in the local school or being sent to boarding school. So I was innately traveling from the age of 1. And of course, when you do that, you meet lots of other people, you have to understand other cultures, you see different landscapes. So I guess the bug or the interest, if you like, in the natural world and other people started there from the beginning. I then had a very interesting thing in school when I was about 14. And I guess it depends what you call these exams, but you normally take 6, 8, 10 of these. And they're all across lots of different subjects. And for one really stupid reason, they told me I was not allowed to study geography. And so I had this extraordinary situation where I was forced to do Latin and something else. I could not do O-level geography, as it was then called. But I was so keen on it that I then insisted on doing an A-level geography. And I got an A. And then I got into Oxford University to study it. And so I became a geographer, even though my teachers didn't really want me to. So that's the backdrop to someone being really interested in the natural world. Of course, in a big degree, you have to study all sorts of things: physical geography, human geography, ethnology, geomorphology, geology. The list goes on and on. And then, of course, you go into work and get married and do things like that. And then you lose a bit of momentum on things like that. But when I came out the other side, I hadn't lost my joy of travel. And now my wife and I have been to over 100 countries together. Yeah. So that's backdrop to how you get interested in the world, if you like. But I can talk about the book more specifically in a minute. Or did you want me to talk a little bit about why?
Yeah, I love the way you say you get interested in the world, but if you can just give us a bit of the so the audience understand, because your scope is not just that one book. You've been doing this for more than 2 decades, so you have quite an experience, and you also do consultancy. So maybe share a bit about that work and you go out and do, and why you have written the books you've written. And we don't have to mention all of them. We'll put the link in the show notes. There's lots of really interesting business books the audience can go in and look at afterwards.
Yes, I certainly wouldn't mention all of them because it would take longer than the entire podcast, I should imagine. Okay, so the backdrop to it is, if you work, as I did, in things like advertising and communication, you need to be good at presenting. And you need to make a case cogently. And I was fortunate enough to have had a decent education. So I took an English A-level as well. And you learn how to build an argument. And there's everybody knows it's the same as maths, actually. You can't just say, oh, the answer to that equation is 6.3. You have to show your workings. And it's exactly the same when you present a case to try and persuade somebody to agree with you, which often is just signing off a budget or approving a project. So you have to put up your theory, if you like, your hypothesis, and then you have to offer up the antithesis as the antithesis of it, argue the pros and cons, and arrive with your synthesis. And if you can do that, really, you can write a book. So fast forward to around about, it was actually the turn of the millennium, 2000. I was actually made redundant for the third time. I just got a bit bored with it. So I just sat down and took a breather and thought, what shall I do? And I started going out and chatting to what would become clients, asking them, what sorts of things do you need fixing that you can't get generally? And one of the first things was training. And so I sat and wrote 5 or 10 training schemes to suit whatever clients were asking for, which I think is always the best way. If there's a demand, pre-demand, if you like, then you're writing the right stuff rather than trying to foist something that you think is rather brilliant on people, but they don't actually want it. So that began the process, if you like. And after about 5 years of being self-employed, people were quite intrigued by it and started saying things to me like, you've got a lot of experience at doing this on your own and it's quite a scary thing. So maybe you should write a book about it. So I did. And it sold really well. So I wrote another one. And that's really how my life works.
So you actually fell into writing books a bit by accident, but actually you were very clear about how you want to write the book. You want to make it very clear and very simple because your books are, if you look in the book, it's very, very, very concise and very, very clear with actions. You have to go and do something, or it's up to you, of course, but there's definitely an activation piece as well, where often you don't see in book, you just see the arguments laid out or the great idea, but then how the hell I'm going to go and do that? What is the action I need to take as a leader? Then you have to figure it out yourself and go and test and learn. And that might not be the most powerful process, but you actually, especially in the book we're going to be talking about now, sustainable business book, you get really clear, concise actions. Go and do this, take this, do this assessment to move the needle forward, which I think is a very different approach that many business books have. And I guess you thought about that when you started writing business books.
Definitely, yeah. There is a bit of a psychology of writing any kind of book, and it does include fiction. And the phrase I usually use for this, which I slightly borrowed from somewhere else, is I write to find out who I am. That is something that writers going back hundreds of years have essentially alighted upon. And that's sort of fine for fiction. And it's fine if you arrive somewhere, but it's not fine in business if you just generally waffle on for 70,000 words and don't offer solutions. And I'm not as impatient as I was perhaps, but generally in business, I just want to get the thing done. And so I started writing, and it's a very interesting thing actually in publishing. This might interest your listeners. You get a contract for a deal, and then they will just tell you how many thousand words they want it to be. And sometimes that number is 50,000, 70,000 words. And I was always baffled by this. I said, well, I've got the concept. I can explain it in 10,000 words or less. Why do you want me to do 50 or 70? And and it's insane. But when I investigated it a bit further, it comes from the ancient publishing world, where if you can imagine that your average book is not face on in a store, okay? This is how you want it to appear, but it doesn't, does it? It appears like this. Get the angle right on the thing, but like on this. Side, and so all you get is this width. Now, this has vexed publishers for years. The reason why they want more words in a book than you want to write is because they want the spine to be fatter so that it's more visible in the shop.
The shelf space,
Insanity. So then we get into the interesting question about whether a book actually deserves to be a book. And as we all know, you go into a bookshop, you pick it up, you read the blurb on the back, you probably open the front, glance at the contents page. And if it's really simple and straightforward, you may well have grasped the entire intention of the book just like that in 30 seconds. In which case, that book did not deserve to be a book. It should actually just be a short paper or a quick blog or a podcast or something else that just gives the idea simply like that. And too many books are only worthy, if you like, of one chapter, one idea, and all the rest is padding of case studies and things from other people and what have you. So to summarize all of that, I now write for the reader, not for me. And I regard it as my brief to myself to make this thing as short as possible because you haven't got the time. And that's why we invented Concise Advice as a series. It's all this information down into one little pocketbook just for you. And you can finish that by the time you've finished your train journey. Take action tomorrow. That's the idea.
Oh, I love that. And also it's very important that you have not just sat down, writing these books. You also, you have a blog where you actually do book reviews. So you read the books that, you say with maybe 50,000 words in. And I read a lot of them. And sometimes, the ones that's behind me is the one that means something to me. And then there's all the others where you get halfway through and think, I've heard this idea before. There's nothing new, or this is just going on and on and on. I'm not going to finish this book with my time. I already spent maybe 20,000 words and I'm not got any smarter or got any actions I can go and take. So talk a bit about your blog and the amount of work and the years that must have taken you to do all these book reviews.
Well, that's kind, yes. My little mantra for it is I read them and summarize them so you don't have to. And that means that it's actually not very difficult if, as the old saying goes, that you'd have been better off if you started this 25 years ago. And I was just fortunate enough that I had the time and have been self-employed now for about a quarter of a century. So if I decide to spend a day reading a book, I can. That's my choice. Whereas people in employment, they can't do that. And I decided early on, it's really simple. I just keep one tiny note about this size in the front of the book. And I start reading, and as soon as I find a point, oh, that's interesting. Page 9, note. Page 27, note. And by the end of it, I've just got a little card with stuff on it. And then I type up a quick summary saying, this is what it says. This is what's good about it. This is what you have to watch. And in more recent times, I will turn that into a short 5-minute podcast. Well, if you build that up over the years, there's over 500 books on there now. And although I am, as it were, an amateur, so it's not professionally done, you can search by topics like creativity, innovation, behavioral economics, whatever, and you can get a quick snapshot. And so you're absolutely right. I regard these concise books as a kind of funnel coming down into the bits that you need to know. One of my friends very kindly described one of those books as a TARDIS of a book. And
I can see that.
So you take all the knowledge of the universe and you get sucked into one policeman's phone box in Doctor Who, and you can buy it for less than £10. And that's how I see it. Yeah.
But what I found really interesting is I find the book I really love. I always go back into the back of the book, and then you can see what have the author been reading to write this piece of work. And then you can start, Great by Choice was one of them that I found. I read that book. I love that. It's Jim Collins. And I can see, the Donor Economics, there's Drive by Daniel Pink. It's another great book. So again, it's also a great way of getting more knowledge. And actually what I love about the books, I'm not barking up the tree, is again, you get that overview to go and find out, what do I need to read more on? What is it that I feel I need more confidence on to go and take action on it? And I think that's really what you help the reader with. So coming over to the work you do with your clients as well. So you also work with clients. It's not like you're just writing books. You also take the knowledge you accumulate by doing these, book reviews, but also building your own frameworks. And we're going to jump into the sustainable business framework in a second. But what is it that you do with your clients? What kind of transformation do you go out and work with them on?
About 70 to 80% of it is training, which will be based on one or various combinations of the books. If you can imagine taking strategy, how to present, negotiation skills, smart thinking, how to generate ideas in brainstorms, how to reduce bullshit and express things clearly, how to work intelligently, all of these things. And that's just business generally, let alone the more ethical and sustainable components which end up in that type of book. So those is one big thing. And that merges into what you might roughly call workshops and facilitation. Because one of the most complicated things people have to deal with is when a chief exec can't really get their leadership team to do what they want them to do.
Yeah.
And so one of the most powerful things we can do, and this is not me saying it, is that it's much more powerful if a chief exec has issues like that with their company or their leadership team. It's really difficult for them to run an away day to try and sort that out, whilst simultaneously being A, the chief exec, and B, the person facilitating the session. So I take the pressure off them by being not so much the tough guy, but the person who's keeping the issue on the case all day. So that the chief exec can properly observe the way the team interact and navigate through with some help from me. So that's facilitation. I really enjoy that. And you can see that there will be many, many moments during such a day when you will be drawing on the reading and the writing to bring in the relevant bits that help solve the thing that we're dealing with.
Yeah, and I guess also getting shared language, which I think could imagine that's really, really powerful, especially the subject we want to dive into today, because we were around a couple of subjects and we ended on sustainable business because it's really important. We take actions as businesses, and I think from our conversation and other conversation often is that we do things, but they're not coherent with the wider business strategy and what's going on around us. So it never becomes a really effective sustainability strategy. Talk a bit about why you came to, I need to write a book to simplify this very complex matter, and what your plan was with it.
Well, if we want a one-word answer, the answer would be frustration. So essentially, my wife and I had spent, let's say, 5, 6, 7 years trying to get the message across to people and businesses about how important it is to migrate your business into being a sustainable one. And on one particular occasion, we were on holiday and saying, are we really getting anywhere with this? What can we do about it? And to cut a long story short, we concluded that we should and could invent a fast method that could allow any business, no matter how small or large, to just get on with it. And so we invented the Planet system. Obviously, it's an acronym, and I can explain what that stands for. And it essentially, as you say, offers 6 stages that businesses can and should go through. But actually, if you're very well informed already, you could enter the process maybe at stage 2 or 3. So would you like me to explain what those elements are?
Yeah, I think that would be really, really good to get the overview. And for the people that is watching the video bit, I can hold up like the
indeed,
framework here.
Yeah, I do know them off by heart, but why not? That's as good a way to do it as any. So obviously Planet is a thing. It's a system, and we work very hard, and Sarah was very smart on this to get it into a memorable mnemonic so that you can actually remember the thing, because so many you can't. So the P stands for panic. And the reason we put that at the beginning is that a lot of people are just kind of lazy about it, don't really want to know, maybe make some excuses, but one way or another, they don't give it proper attention. And so that's the dramatic word at the beginning says, come on, shake this tree. You need to pay attention to this. And that's why there are some dramatic mega stats at the beginning. Having said that, by the way, for listeners, we thoroughly understand you cannot win a sustainability argument by browbeating somebody with scare tactics and so on. It doesn't work like that because they just entrench even more. Anyway, whoever was going to make some change in their company or their own lives, they need to panic first, roughly speaking. Assuming they have panicked, then they've got to learn. Now, we were talking already about how a lot of people, they will pronounce on sustainability issues, for example, ESG, ethical, all sorts of aspects of it. But actually, sadly, they don't really know what they're talking about. So they will chuck around things like CO2, emissions, climate change, climate crisis, ESG, all sorts of general jargon. It doesn't mean they know what it actually means. Yeah. And often you'll be talking to someone, they say, oh, well, of course, it's all about net zero. So that's interesting. What is net zero? And they don't know. So without being rude to any one individual, we offer a learn phase, which explains to you what you need to know in fast, plain English. And indeed, as you say, giving you access to all sorts of other ways of learning should you wish to learn. Then we move on to agree. This is because so many people in business don't want to change. And because they don't want to change, they can't agree that they must change this aspect of the business. And in almost every board of directors we come across, there are some resistors in the corner of the room. They have their arms folded like this. And they think, I'm just going to hang on to the way it works now so I can get my bonus for the next 5 years. And then they go away, leaving the thing no better than it was. So these are all sorts of, we hope, intelligent ways to get people to arrive somewhere helpful. And then you get to the end, which is navigate. And navigate is navigating through your own company, if it's a large one, or through the entire process of change, or through any kind of accreditation or improvement process that you need to go through so that the business is genuinely changing rather than just some cursory bits and pieces. And then you can enact the plan because it's thoroughly worked out then. And only then at the end do you tell anybody. This is deliberate because so many companies start telling people, whereas the outside world, oh, look at what we're doing for this, look at what we're doing for that. And it's just bits and pieces. And that is, of course, the origin of greenwashing. So that's the essence of the plan. And it comes with a series of online tools which enable companies to, you can take a quick audit for free, work out how am I doing on these issues generally. Then if you're a company, you can spend £500 and do your own thing properly, in which case you get impact reports, real-time dashboard, all these other things. So we create all this stuff so that really anybody that we talk to should not be able to have an excuse and say, I don't know what to do next.
Yeah, and again, it's I think for many, as you say, just that the learn phase and sharing understanding of what net zero is, so there's a shared language again about these things. Because the thing actually often what happens in boardroom is that there's not a shared understanding of the words and the concepts, and then also, therefore, there will not be a shared push to implement whatever they agree on. And they might start on the wrong thing. They might say, oh, we want to be a B Corp, but actually that's not where they should start. Then they go out and communicate, oh, we are now applying for B Corp, as you say, they tell the story, and then they do this whole process. It's not really what they should have started with. They should maybe have started with something that's much more tangible downstream in the supply chain with maybe a supplier, improving those conditions and so on. Something where it's really impacting something bigger than taking the certification. And then they can go and do the certification at some point. It's, of course, a great certification. But sometimes you need to look at what is the 20 that gives 80%. Again, it's like any other business area you have to make decisions on.
Thoroughly agreed. And another element of it, which is a real problem, is time. And when I say time, I don't mean the amount of time available to an individual or company to get a thing done. I don't mean that. I mean, how far away on a time horizon are the targets that are agreed by anything from major world legislation down to national governments, down to industries, categories, and so on, and then down to one company? What I mean by that is that if you say, yes, we have a clear plan and we have a target of X for 2050, well, your average person's looking at that thinking, I'll be dead by then. And so the number is irrelevant. And when you then start mapping that against speed with which people move jobs. I'll give you one example, but I just happen to know this stat, is that the average tenure of a UK marketing director in their job is 18 months.
Yeah.
And so they can set any plan they want because they know very well they ain't going to be there. And so everybody says yes, and everybody does nothing. And that's what we call the strategy execution gap. And we've had hundreds and hundreds of people to take a survey on the system. And we find on average about 85% of all business people, including business owners, chief execs, everybody, say that sustainability is utterly crucial to their business model and they thoroughly believe in it. And then depending as you go down that chart, in some instances, they only do 16% of them do anything about it, even something as simple as using renewable energy. And that's the gap we're trying to close.
I got a thought when you were talking about that. I never thought about this before. I know it was just be interesting to discuss this with you, because is that actually, because you talk about in the book in the beginning that climate crisis is a people problem.
Yes.
Now, talk a bit about that, because that really, for me, was a bit like, oh, that was a different way of looking at it, because that's also like, I totally agree with you. The problem is that actually, the tenure of you're in a job to actually make a difference sometimes is maybe too small, because you are in, and we can come back talking about growth afterwards. But I just wanted to touch on that. The people, it's a people problem, sustainability.
It certainly is. I mean, it's almost a
sort of climate crisis. Yeah.
Yeah. It's sort of an oxymoron that there's no such thing as a company if you take away people.
No.
If there's no humans, there is no company. So that's just a basic fact.
Yeah.
What then gets interesting is whether anybody wants to change or do anything. And it is what I would call it a social issue. I was reading this again the other day, but it was from a United Nations paper from 1972. It's from 50 years ago. Mm-hmm. And the conclusion was nobody is disputing the facts, the scientific facts about what is occurring to the planet. No one's arguing about that, because there's nothing to argue about, because there's so much proof that it is inevitably true. The resistance comes from different national interests and social values. In other words, yes, I thoroughly agree that we need more water for everybody in the world, but I nevertheless insist on carry on with my dam building project. And that's because my people need it and yours don't. And as soon as you get down to that, immediately it's a human problem. You can look at anything from the war is a classic, isn't it?
Mm.
I'm not a political guy, but war is really not very complicated. Just saying, I hate your lot, and I'm going to kill them, and vice versa. Repeat, forever.
Yeah.
The same with water wars, the same with famine, the same with transport, the same with migration. Every major issue is related to people being unable to get on and see the other point of view.
Is that compassion that's missing in the world? It's a bit like...
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we could do with a lot more of that. And it doesn't have to be weak to the point where everybody's so compassionate that they get trodden on themselves, because that's not a balance, is it?
No.
Broad understanding and being reasonable would be a better way.
And then if we dive into the book as well, where you touch on something, you talk about growth, and Simon Sinek also, and I did a podcast on that, on the growth dilemma when we came out of the pandemic, where everybody's back again. Actually, you thought when everything stopped, you actually thought this is the time where we're just going to have a rethink about how we look at business, and actually how we actually grow our business. And actually we might not need to grow, we just might need to get better. So talk a bit about, the paradigm of growth and the consistent, pressure to get more of it.
Yeah, this is really complicated or very simple, depending on what your perspective is on it.
Yeah.
So if we start with the basics, the planet, as I saw described once, is just a little spaceship flying through the universe, and it's got some oil and air on it. and soil and a few bits. It's not very complicated. So it is by definition finite. And that, of course, is why now many companies are trying to go to the moon and Mars to find other places and increase what the finite limit is. And people get very confused because when they say, oh, well, I've thrown that away, they say, yeah, but it hasn't disappeared. It doesn't now not exist. It's arrived somewhere else, such as in the Atacama Desert, where they've now dropped 29,000 tons of old clothing and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So it arrived somewhere. So I think what governments get very confused about is using GDP, gross domestic product, as a simile, if you like, for prosperity, which it patently isn't. In other words, they just want that figure for GDP to go up. And if it's going up, they think that's good news economically, therefore everybody's happy. And that is old-fashioned, old-school thinking because it's not true and it doesn't work. It made a certain amount of sense post-war when a large number of economies were trying to get back on their feet. And there probably was a rough correlation between more people are getting paid more, there are more jobs, it's all heading in the right direction, everyone's got a fridge in the kitchen now and so on, it's all heading in one direction. That is old thinking, doesn't apply anymore. And that's why we need ways to create prosperity without growth. And as you were hinting at, I think, to give a simple example, if I make exactly the same money, let's say somebody has exactly the same income as they had last year, but that income goes further. And the reason why it might go further would be other costs have come down, other shared services exist. The people who are paying you the money, you're actually making a better margin on it. And you're doing that because you're selling more premium products instead of fast, short-term things and so on. It's really not particularly complicated. And of course, and finally related to that point is that it's all very well top people, particularly rich ones and politicians talking about growth. But they're the ones who've got all the money anyway. And that growth is not just unevenly spread around the world. It is so lopsided to the tune of, well, we know that something like the top 1% of people in the world actually earn more than the other 99%. I noticed a really interesting suggestion in Brazil last week, which is that they want to tax their top billionaires, and that would pay for pretty much every social care and climate program that they need. And it's going to be controversial, but it probably won't be voted through because the people voting on it are the rich people.
Yeah.
So you never get anywhere. At any rate, I'm waffling a little bit, but those are some of the issues connected with growth.
Yeah, and I think also what's really interesting when you read on that is that it said that 50% of the wealth belongs to the top 1%, and I thought that was really an interesting fact. I had an idea about that was how the world worked, but I never seen it that way. And also, if we continue doing what we're doing, another factor you said there's a 1.7 planets needed just to sustain what we're doing now. Which is quite scary because, that's not possible. That's not sustainable. So we're really moving towards, and I thought it's a great way of them. And then I thought that what the next thing the book comes into was really interesting and is like, when people talk about, greenhouse gases, because that's something it's taken me a long time to get the head around. And, I think really interesting, to understand how much do we actually add to the atmosphere every year. And lots of people talking about planting trees. That's to offset what we're adding. But can you talk a bit about that actually, and when you typically go into work with a leadership group, because you already touched a bit on it, they have this, maybe they all have individual understanding of the words and how to do it. But actually, what is the typical gap in there? Because I think it's really critical you understand that before you make the plan.
Yes, I think that in quite a lot of boardrooms and so on that we go into, a lot of them have grasped the main concepts. But we call it the echo chamber. And that is the small number of people that we know who do indeed understand all these things because they've studied it all. And then if you only talk to them, that leads you to the impression that the whole country knows all about it. But of course they don't.
Yeah.
So it's not, no one's trying to point the finger at the average person in the street and say, why on earth haven't you got to grips with these issues? Because it's more to do with personal behavior for them. But if we take a few of the things that frequently crop up, first of all, your average person is not a geographer, a geologist, or a scientist or anything like this. And therefore, the time delay between the extraordinary growth, we call it the Great Acceleration, in the Industrial Revolution, which goes like a hockey stick up like this, led to so much carbon arriving in the atmosphere that large proportions of it is still there.
Yeah.
And so it's a bit like geology and dinosaurs. People cannot get their head around, why can't we just sort of plant a few trees now and that'll negate that? The time delays are extraordinary. So that's one thing that causes a lot of trouble. Cause and effect is another one. In other words, if something over here is done, it affects that over there. And the interconnectedness of, for example, weather systems, ocean systems, and so on. Once again, your average person could be forgiven for not understanding that. However, if you're a chief exec and you have a supply chain which intrinsically ships from or to, let's say, China across the oceans, doing this, doing that, emitting this amount of diesel, then I believe it becomes your professional duty to understand what those effects are.
Yeah.
Another issue is what we call externalities or externalization. And simply put, what this means is that there are a lot of first world countries, the global north, if you like, who essentially say, yes, I understand all these issues, but we don't have bad air quality here. We do have very good recycling here. We do have high quality of life. We don't have social inequality, And they will use that as a construct to say, we are running ourselves and our country very well, while simultaneously ignoring the fact that all the nasty elements have been exported or externalized to somewhere else. In other words, right, a bunch of people in Bangladesh are working for nearly no money, child labor. They are making the clothes which come back to me. So that's not our problem, is it? That's Bangladesh's problem. And you can repeat that with building of factories, water pollution, any element you want, dumping clothes in the Atacama. None of these issues apparently exist in the countries who claim they're really doing the right thing. Our recycling levels are huge. We've got great infrastructure. Yes, but where have you put it or got it from? And that is one of the most insidious elements of carbon emission, pollution, and all other environmental issues, as well as the social ones. There's always somebody somewhere else in the world who's built that thing that you just bought for a vast amount of money.
Is there, if you talk about doing the right thing, is there, is it possible to be, 100% on this matter? Because whatever you do will impact somewhere in the supply chain, up or down.
Yeah. No, it's impossible to be 100% on anything. There's no such thing. What is a thing that people can do is, instead of talking about highly specific things like recycling and what have you, all of which can be used as some sort of eco badge of honor anyway, is to just stop buying so much stuff. It's overconsumption. It's people with hundreds of dresses, t-shirts, whatever we got in, and they've only worn them once or not at all. And they will use shopping as a leisure activity.
Yeah.
I don't do that. I never go shopping. I only go shopping if I need something to eat or my trousers have fallen apart. Really, honestly, most of my t-shirts are over 20 years old. Now, I'm not saying I'm so brilliant, but it's perfectly possible. Everybody has free choice. Just stop buying stuff. You don't need it.
Yeah, and I think that's really on the personal level. And one of the things I would like to touch with you as well is that when you go in then and work with companies about, doing this transformation of sustainability, what is like the typical picture you see? We've talked a bit about, do they have a shared language and so on, but where are they on that journey? Because I think everybody is, if they're a bit established business, they're doing their bit, and they maybe also have ambition if they're a startup business. But what typical do you see when you come in?
Well, we're very commercial, by which I mean we do not go in and say to people, you really need to shrink your business and be more sustainable. It's never that. It's business transformation, reducing the bad stuff and increasing the good stuff.
Yeah.
So most businesses can have a better effect on their customers, on their factories, their products, their anything. And so maximizing the positive stuff is one way of looking at it, and minimizing the negative is another. Then what we normally do is try to get the agreement of the most senior person we can find. The funny thing is, though, in business is that if you're a chief exec, you probably have another 100 chief execs below you. And that's where the trouble starts. And so we try to identify the most influential group, brackets, preferably a small one, not more than 20 people, preferably closer to 10, that we can properly work with. And they need to be slightly favorably disposed to the cause at the beginning. Otherwise, you can't get anywhere if you've got a complete resistance. No. And then we'll say, right, let's run a workshop. We'll run a survey first amongst the 15, 20 people coming to get all their views. We will report back those views to them at the beginning of the session, which establishes what degree broadly do we have of consensus in the room. And typically you're going to get at least 5 resistors out of 20. And in a way, even though we do those surveys anonymously, that will become apparent to their colleagues really fast just because of the way they resist and don't want to answer questions and all the rest of it. We would go through what you might call the business landscape. In other words, what types of legislation, activities, competition, etc., are affecting you, your category, your competitors, and so on? Broadly, what is that? And then, what can you do about it? And that's where life starts getting interesting. Now, in many instances, if a company is slow, it may have no products whatsoever that are helpful under the sustainability heading at all. Which could mean just that the way they make them is fundamentally not sustainable, therefore that's the place to start. Or if they are consultants and advisory and so on, that they haven't got people in their own sales force, consultancy force and so on, who actually know anything about this at all or really care. And so as a result, therefore, they're not making any money from that topic because they haven't got anyone who knows anything about it. And it's hugely lucrative. So what we normally end up doing is, if you like, joining together the need for more business, brackets growth that doesn't have to be growth, just because bear in mind that high ticket premium value consultancy services, if that's what they are, or same for products, can mean that your profit will grow, but your manufacturing output doesn't have to. And so what we do then is we file that under business transformation, and we usually get senior people to design essentially new revenue streams. And then we set project teams running and they can go away and invent those things. If it's more complicated than that, then we have to repeat that process with the next 30 chief execs and so on until the things really gain momentum.
One of the interesting things you have in here is also how you put the plan together. Because I think that's really interesting. How do you actually make this work in reality? Because how do you find the right things to do? We just talked a little bit about that before, but now again, where you say, okay, if your product not sustainable and make a lot of harm, you probably need to start there because that's your 20% to give 80%. But how do you actually put a plan together that everybody's involved in and actually, because I guess there's no, click of a switch here when you do these things because you can't measure the impact straight away. That's one thing. But also you have to maybe if you're turning a big company, it's a super tanker. in a small river. But also small companies, that's maybe a result thing. There's benefits and, pros and cons in both of them. But what is the typical way to build a good plan for this?
Well, this is where Sarah comes in, really, because she's so intelligent that she will invent these products that I'm describing. They're in the book and they're very user-friendly online. So it all starts with a quick audit. And the joy of the quick audit, which is 30 questions, is that it tells you roughly whether you're making any progress or know anything about this at all. And so nobody gets 30 out of 30 because they don't actually know half the time. And the average would be about 16, 18 points. But some people come in at 5 or 6 out of 30.
Yeah.
So that's your first rangefinder, which tells you, well, I need to learn a lot more here. The next product along is, and the answer to your question, is that Sarah has designed and written essentially an impact report system. And for that, you answer 60 questions and you're filling it in as best you can based on the knowledge that you have. Now, that product is yours for life, which means that you can update it any time. And what it means is that you fill it in first, but you own it, right? So if you think, wow, there was 10 things there, I didn't even know what the question was. I wonder if we have any department in our company that is dealing with that. You go away, you find out, and either you add it into the report thinking, oh, that's good, actually. I didn't know that was happening, but it is, and we are making some progress. Or you move to the next tab, which is, we need an initiative to deal with that thing. Anywhere from measure it, start it, fix it, begin it, end it, whatever. So this entire thing becomes an improvement plan. So, so what that means is nobody who's ever seen that from us, and I'm not pushing us particularly, nobody can say, I don't know how to write an improvement plan because we've written it for you. All you have to do is populate it with the material that is relevant to your business, and then it will move you on to the next step. So that's the broad answer to that. Specifically, when it comes to, well, what do we do now then? We have a very simple matrix, which is minimum effort, maximum effect. And this enables you to dump all things that you need to be doing into one of the 4 quadrants. And that gives you your quick wins. There you go. You've got it. Yeah.
I love that one. So I made a note. Yeah.
Lovely. High impact, low effort. So it's very simple, particularly for any resistors, is to say, oh, that's far too much work. So no, look, okay, we got 37 things we could be doing here. Which are the easiest 3? And they go straight into the quick win box. No one can deny they're actually quite easy to get on with. So you get on with them. And that gives you your first step and your first piece of momentum to give you the encouragement to move on to the next bit.
Yeah, because it's about creating the momentum. And I love the way you talk about it in the book as well, where you talk on continuous improvement, because some of the best businesses in the world are built on these models. So I had a past in McDonald's, you know that. In principle, there's a system there that's called the restaurant improvement system. I don't know if it still exists, but it definitely exists in some kind of form. But actually, it's about the 1% you move the business every day. And you have very clear parameters on what success look like. So it'll be quality, service, and cleanliness, and in a McDonald's context, plus some other systems you're monitoring. And that's actually what you're monitoring to get your KPIs. If that's sales, CO2 reduction, whatever it is, customer service, employee engagement, all those, managing these systems and working on improving them is actually key. And there, since sustainability should be measured in some kind of way there, if that's CO2 emission or your target or your journey to net zero. So maybe you're at 50 and need to go to 1. So where are you in a way? And I think that's really when it's driven, and then you drive initiatives to improve the individual systems you agree on. And I love that. I really think that's really, really powerful. And I think if you don't have that in general, that will just improve your business. It's not just about sustainability. It just makes your business much more professional business.
Thoroughly agreed. I mean, I'm not an accountant and measurement can be boring, but if you don't measure anything, particularly when it comes to sustainability, Some people haven't even measured their state of affairs right now. And without that base data, you're incapable of knowing what to attend to and whether you're making any progress.
Yeah, and coming back to, you talked about the tenure people are in their job. And then you talk about the 20-mile march, which comes from Jim Collins and Morton T. Hansen's brilliant work. A book where they talk about, how great businesses become great, exactly because they walk the 20-mile march. Talk a bit about why you put that in the book of sustainability, because that's normally, the story is normally used in management book and very well known from Jim Collins and Morton T. Hansen's work in Choose to Be Great.
Yes.
The book Choose to Be Great, yeah.
So that particular anecdote, piece of learning, if you like, is all about consistency rather than erratic bursts of energy. And if we take a simple example, I've met people in the past and they regard sustainability as a kind of craze or a fad. And they'll say, oh, sustainability, yes, we did that last year. As though it was a project and it's done. Which, of course, tells you immediately that they don't get it, because sustainability is everybody's responsibility and it's never finished. So that's the backdrop to it. The story that you're referring to it's really salutary, I think. Essentially, when Scott and Amundsen were heading to the pole, Amundsen had worked out that the optimum number of miles that his team should travel each day was 20. Regardless of conditions, weather conditions.
20 miles, yeah.
20, yeah. And that was based as scientifically as possible at the time on the energy of the dogs, the weight of the packs, the material they've got, all that stuff. Whereas Scott, he was more cavalier. And so if the weather was really bad, he would allow the team to stay in their tents for a large proportion of the day and perhaps only do 7 miles. And at the other end of the spectrum, if it was glorious weather, he would allow them to do 27 miles in a day, completely overshooting their energy. Then the following day, they're completely exhausted because they've overshot, because they got excited. So the metaphor for business is the consistency. You don't undershoot and you don't overshoot. You are just relentlessly sorted and organized and patient and orderly. And that is how you should view sustainability.
Yeah, that's also why you have to make choices where you take the 20% that gives 80% and actually do them really well. And then when you're done with that, and you can check that off, as you say, you can start the next initiative on your list. But I'm sure people will have more than 3 initiatives they need to go and fix. So maybe you can only manage 1, but managing 1 really well is better than managing none. Trying to start too many things. I have this discussion all the time in business about, they're all great ideas, but what is the one idea we believe right now that's going to change the game for us? So that's the one thing we should go and do, really, and do well. Not trying to do 10 half-hearted or 3 half-hearted, for that sake.
Correct. Anyone can start an initiative and anyone can have an idea.
Yeah.
Completing it is completely different. In fact, there is a school of thought which I believe in from my creative days, which is an idea doesn't count unless you've made it happen.
Yeah.
Anyone can have a good idea. And if anything, we've got too many of them. Yeah, exactly. And they call it innovation overload, don't they? Where you say, right, yes, we do indeed have 27 projects running. Aren't we fertile and active and imaginative and all the rest of it? They're great. How many of them are actually done? Well, they're all work in progress, you see. Are they? Right. And you're absolutely right there, Thor. And it really depends on what resources you've got at your disposal. If you had 60,000 staff, which can be the case with some of our network clients, then it might be possible to have 20 projects running at the same time, so long as you've got the right people in the right places backed up to do it. But smaller the business, that ain't going to be the case. And then you might just want to do one thing for 3 months or a year until that one thing provides a building block to get other things happening. And that's...
Yeah, and also...
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and also that gives the confidence to other people around you or in the organization. We can actually do this. We are on the journey now. We're taking the first 20 miles, for that sake.
Exactly. And that helps clarity as well, and energy and everything, really, to make that stuff happen. And that's why the improvement plan that Sarah has designed, it navigates you through that, because you say, okay, we did that thing and it is emphatically done. Tick, done. Now, what's next?
Yeah.
And then you map and you go. And that's how you get your marches going.
What would be the one or your top advice to leaders, no matter size of business, that want to build a business as a force for good? What should they do in this moment of time? I think there's never been more talk about, the food system, climate change. We're all feeling it now. We can go to the supermarket some days and then suddenly the cauliflower is the size of a tennis ball. And other days they are massive, so people are now seeing climate change in front of it. Especially here in the UK, we also seen a lot of rainfall this year. The farmers has been impacted. The temperature is weird. There's things going on in the world this year where you can really see it's time for action, and business play a huge role in that. But what if you want to give an advice to leaders that want to make business that really helps solving these problems?
So I would offer probably about 3 things. I'll do them really fast. The first is that if you are indeed the chief exec and you are the most senior person in the building, then it is possible through power of character to make everybody else change the business for the good, because you're the one in charge and you're the one saying so. And if you are in circumstances of that type, which is not very common, but if you are, then use that character and position for the good. So I would start with that. A second point, which I think is worth mentioning, is that we have lots of discussions about the acronym ESG, environmental, social, governance. But I think it's worth just making a point about the second and third letter. It's very easy for people to call or believe that sustainability is just the green stuff. In other words, just environmental.
Oh yeah, very important point.
Right. And so a lot of the social part of what we're talking about, which is a critical part of what sustainability actually involves, is strangely ignored. It doesn't seem so glamorous somehow. And so people latch on to the environmental stuff. So I would say to that chief exec, get concentrating on all the social implications, particularly in any supply chain that you have that goes to other countries that doesn't pay people properly and so on. And the third one would be related to the third letter, which is governance. Yeah. Now, this is something that Sarah and I discuss a lot, and with any client who will listen to us. The only reason governance exists is because the people who are doing the work or making the products can't be trusted to govern themselves. If you think that through logically, you say, we have a board of trustees, we have an advisory board. Well, what are they for? Well, they're to advise us and make sure that we report properly and on this and that. Well, why is that? Well, I suppose because someone's concluded that the current board might not do it properly. And that's what governance is. And they have it in financial services, everywhere, governance. If everybody did things appropriately, you wouldn't need any governance at all.
Yeah, and I guess it comes back to a totally different business subject. Come back to organizational design. Like what type of organization are you actually, creating and designing? Is it the Christmas tree with no trust, or exactly the bottom-up approach where you actually use the ability of using all the resource and intelligence that's within inside your ecosystem, so it becomes an ecosystem instead of all the answers to the questions is in the top of the organization, which it rarely is. It's actually in the bottom of the organization.
Exactly right. And I think you mentioned earlier about people, for example, believing that their journey on sustainability should be to get B Corp certification, for example. In other words, a badge to show that they are doing the right thing. But once again, if you look at the psychology of such a thing, and I'm not saying it's wrong, is that if you and your company are doing the right thing, you don't need a badge from anybody. You're just doing the right thing. So why don't you just do the right thing?
Yeah. And often I think, it's depending on, because I've been discussing B Corp, and I think it's a great scheme because actually it helps a bit like your book does. It gives a framework for taking action. But if you're just like trying to change the algorithm so that it fits your world as it is now to get the badge, it's not going to work because that's not really what it's about. If you get the badge tomorrow or in 3 years' time, it's not going to, I don't believe it's going to change because people can look through those things now. They can see greenwashing, as you mentioned before. So yeah, I totally agree on that. A really good point to get across here in the end. Is there any question, Kevin, you wished I've asked you? Because there's so much context in this. We could probably gone on for hours and hours, but we need to respect the format in a way. But we will be back with an episode 2 where your wife, Sarah, will come on, and we're going to angle even more down on the food and hospitality angle. But is there any question you wished I asked you for this conversation, and what would it be, and what would you answer?
Thank you. I think we've touched on a lot of stuff, actually. But if there were 2 things that I would put even more emphasis on, it would be the small point I made about overconsumption.
Yeah.
People can wrap themselves up in every form of language they like, but unless you boil it down to something really straightforward, is could you please buy less? That would be a thing. You could run an entire away day on that topic. And the second thing we also touched on a little bit, but it's all about inequalities. We talked about it at the big level and at the international level. I don't hear enough thoughtful language from senior business people in perfectly well-off countries, really, talking about inequalities, plural. It's not stuff that they look at, really. They look at spreadsheets and have they got their D&I quota and all this type of thing, and that's fine. But generally, very few people sit around thinking, I'm really privileged here, and that's not okay. What can we do to make it better for someone who hasn't got anywhere to sleep, for example? Simple stuff.
Yeah, and to really take it down to where the problem is, exactly. And people walk past the problems every day. So it's not like you don't see them, or you can choose not to see them, but they are just there when you start moving around in most city or even the countryside. If you move around there, talking about monocultures that's depleted the farmland and so on. So there's it's so visible to us. So it's just about making a choice, as you say, really make the choice of where you're going to make an impact and how we're going to make an impact now and here for them.
That's right. And I think the simplest one is homelessness. When I say simple, I mean, it's just plain language. In a developed society such as ours, it's disgraceful that anybody should not have a roof over their head each night. It can be solved easily. So why don't we just do it?
Yeah. A lovely place to end the conversation. So why don't we actually take action when we have, and lots of these problems, and we didn't even talk about that today, but often many of the problems that is created here could actually be solved by redistribution of resources.
Exactly.
As you talked about, they were talking about in Brazil. Where can people find out about you and connect with you and the team? Where's the best place to go?
Well, we've got probably too many digital assets. But the main one for today's conversation is sustainablebusinessbook.com.
Yeah.
Everything I've been describing is in there. How to get the books, how to download free audits, take it, upgrade to other things, it's all there. And on a more general business platform, if you like, expertadviceonline.com lets people see all the other stuff, the books that we create that are on different subjects and educational materials, all that sort of stuff.
We'll put it all in the show notes. Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation and trying to help us a bit, getting a better grip on how to build a more sustainable business. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Mike. I really enjoyed it. Wide ranging. That's what we like.
It was wide ranging.
Thank you.